Explosions were heard overnight in several regions of Russia, including areas near Moscow. According to Russian authorities, air defenses were responding to drone attacks. Meanwhile, the border city of Belgorod was hit by a missile strike. Energy facilities were damaged, leaving parts of the city without electricity. Local officials say the region came under heavy shelling. Several Russian airports also temporarily suspended operations due to the attacks. A Ukrainian delegation is traveling to Geneva for a new round of talks involving the United States and Russia, scheduled for February 17 and 18. Presidential Office Chief Kirill Budanov said the team is already on the way and stressed that the priority is to defend Ukraine's interest. Meanwhile, Russia has reshuffled its delegation, now led by Kremlin aide Vladimir Medinsky. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said he hopes the talks will continue despite the change and warned that any proposals requiring Ukraine to withdraw from Donetsk region would be dangerous. The Kremlin has already signaled that territorial issues will be among the key topics in Geneva. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov confirmed that Medinsky and other senior Russian officials will take part in the negotiations. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Ukrainians cannot be asked to trust security promises without real guarantees after the world once failed to protect them. In an interview with Politico, he recalled that Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons and military assets under the Budapest Memorandum in exchange for security assurance. But he said Ukraine ended up without weapons and without protection when Russia invaded. Zelenskyy stressed that Ukrainians are not living in illusions. They have lost families, homes, and their way of life, and they believe Russia will attack again. He said people are not asking if Russia comes back, but when. That is why any talk of compromise must begin with a clear and binding security guarantees. The Ukrainian president warned that territorial concessions without guarantees would only allow Russia to regroup and strike again. He added that the United States and allies could send a strong signal now by committing to Ukraine's security before any negotiations on territory.
In the end, we have neither those weapons nor the security guarantees. No one defended our independence. That is the truth. And that is why it is clear why people do not trust. They are not living in a world of fantasy. They are realists, and they have lost so much: their loved ones, their homes, their way of life.
Hillary Clinton delivered sharp criticism of Donald Trump's policy toward Ukraine during a panel discussion at the Munich Security Conference. The former U.S. Secretary of State said that any pressure on Kyiv to make concessions to Russia contradicts the interest of the democratic world and effectively benefits the Kremlin. She stressed that Ukraine remains the front line in the defense of Western values, while full responsibility for the war lies with the Russia's leadership. According to Clinton, Russia's aggression stems from Vladimir Putin's drive to impose control over Ukraine despite the human losses and destruction.
Ukraine is fighting for our democracy and our values of freedom and civilization on the front lines, losing thousands of people and having their country destroyed by one man's mania to control them. And I think Trump either doesn't understand or could care less about that suffering.
Ukrainian refugee has been killed in the United States. 21-year-old Katerina Tovmash, originally from Bila Tserkva, was shot dead inside her home in North Carolina. Her partner, a 28-year-old U.S. Army serviceman, was also killed. Police say the main suspect is Katerina's former boyfriend. Investigators believe he entered the house early in the morning, where Katerina was living with the younger relatives and shot both victims while children were inside. The children were not harmed. The suspect fled the state, but was later arrested in Ohio. He is now in custody and faces double murder charges. Katerina had moved to the United States after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It is the second killing of a Ukrainian woman in North Carolina within a year. In August last year, 23-year-old Irina Zarutska was found dead in Charlotte with multiple stab wounds. Police arrested a suspect, a 34-year-old homeless man with a criminal record, and charged him with a murder. 60% of Ukrainian refugees in Europe still hope to return home after 4 years of a full-scale war, according to a study by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic host the largest numbers of Ukrainians displaced by the invasion. However, employment among Ukrainian refugees remains low, at about 45%. Unemployment is much higher than among local populations, and some refugees report lower pay. Public attitudes have also worsened in several countries, with politicians increasingly blaming Ukrainians for pressure on state budgets, despite evidence that they contribute more to the economy than they receive. Temporary protection status in the European Union is set to run until March 2027. The uncertainty is pushing many Ukrainians to seek longer-term residence through jobs or education. Former recruiters from Russia's Wagner Group have shifted to organizing sabotage operations across Europe. The Financial Times reports, citing Western intelligence officials, that networks once used to recruit fighters for Ukraine are now targeting vulnerable people inside NATO countries to carry out attacks. These include arson, sabotage, and staged provocations, from attacks on aid warehouses for Ukraine to operations meant to look like far-right activism. Intelligence sources say Russia is increasingly relies on so-called disposable agents, marginalized individuals recruited for money. After mass explosions of Russian spies from Europe, the Kremlin has turned more to intermediaries, and Wagner networks have become a key tool. European security services say they have uncovered a broad network of such operatives, and that many planned attacks have been prevented because recruits often lack skill and leave traces. Putin could move against Europe as early as this year. A Ukrainian military expert warns. Ukrainian defense analyst Valentin Badrak says Russia may try to test NATO if it struggles to achieve results on the battlefield in Ukraine. He believes Moscow could launch a hybrid operation against a NATO member, most likely in the Baltic region, using covert forces and local unrest to create what looks like an internal crisis. According to Badrak, the Kremlin sees Western societies as less prepared for casualties and long wars than Ukraine, which is fighting for survival. He also says European armies remain heavily dependent on the United States and are not yet ready for a large-scale ground confrontation with Russia. The warning comes amid growing debate in Europe about strengthening joint defense with the Ukraine to deter further Russian aggression. But Estonia has warned it would take the war onto Russian territory if Russia launches an invasion. Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna said in an interview with a German broadcaster Deutsche Welle that Estonia is not a weak point in Europe, rejecting claims that country would be an easy target. He stressed that Estonia is strengthening its defenses and that NATO is now stronger than ever, with the new defense plans already in place. At the same time, Tsahkna questioned Europe's political will to confront Russia and criticized the idea of negotiating with the Kremlin without a clear strategy. He said decades of engagement with Moscow had only made Russia more aggressive and weakened Ukraine's position. Debate continues in Europe over direct talks with the dictator Putin. Former Finnish President Sauli Niinisto is seen as a leading candidate for a possible EU envoy role. That is all for now. Please subscribe for more content.